let's move on to Thyatira. I pronounce it the Greek way. I know in America everybody says Thyatira, but it's I'm influenced here. But so the, again, this is a cemetery preserved in the middle of the town of Akhisar. And so this is what it all looked like when we took groups here for years. It was just broken down, overgrown, not much to see. Some of the groups would even skip going here because they'd say it's just kind of a waste of time to go. They built a nice small museum here, but now they've just done a nice restoration.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Yeah, so this is what we call a stoa or a portico. So the temple in Jerusalem had these all around it. So when we read in Acts where the early church met, they met in the Stoa of Solomon. So yeah, these were just a part of every city. They would be covered, providing shade in the summertime and shelter for rain in the wintertime. So they would line the main streets. So this is the one here in Thyatira that has just been reconstructed and open for visitors.
Did a great job in those beautiful Ionic columns. So just really great.
And of course, one of the advantages they have here in Turkey is they can go to the original quarries.
Yeah, that's right.
That the Romans used to do this and get the same stone, mill it, and then put it in the restoration.
And there are some amazing things that are going on. I've read in other places and other articles where scholars can use and archaeologists and conservators can use 3D carving, where they can actually go in and scan and create a stone exact replica of columns or whatever the case may be with 3D printing, which it's kind of hard to say printing because it's I guess that's what it is though.
Yeah, they still have the stonemasons here that can take this marble and limestone and replicate it. It's quite amazing.
That's really cool. Well, it's good to know that that now when people visit, they can actually have a visual to see what it may have looked like.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth a stop these days. Now, of course, Sardis is a major site. The Americans are working here. So this one of the Harvard expedition has been working since the 20s here. And so your tax dollars are supporting the American Research Institute in Turkey with centers in Istanbul and in Ankara. So we have excavations at Gordian, and we also have the one at Sardis. So Nick Kay, who is at Wisconsin, is heading the project now. And so this is the best preserved Artemis temple that we have in Turkey today. So we have 3 in Western Turkey. You saw not much left of the one in Ephesus. So this is the one that we see in Sardis. And just to the lower left, you see the remains of a very small basilica. This is one of the earliest churches we've got in Turkey. So from the first phase, it dates to about the middle of the 4th century. So it's very early.
Very cool. Who, and by the way, just for our listeners, who was Artemis? Could you give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch? Who was it? Greek god, Roman god?
Well, she's the huntress typically. And her twin brother is Apollo, the god of prophecy. And so her appearance we have many statues of her. And then in certain places like Ephesus particularly, you see a melding of the traditional Greek Artemis with the Anatolian mother goddess. So many of you have seen pictures of the 2 famous statues that were found in Ephesus with these breast-like protuberances or appendages hanging from her lower chest.
Yes.
I don't think these are breasts because the Greeks definitely knew how to put breasts on a woman. I personally think they're eggs because they represent fertility. And so you have this fusion of the Anatolian with the Greek, especially in her presentation in Ephesus.
And in these temples, Mark, what would they basically pour out incense, or would there be sacrifices there? Do we have any historical information on that?
Well, we do, especially for Ephesus. It was a banking center. They would put money in there. It would be an asylum. For example, people, just like the cities of refuge in the Old Testament. In Israel, the temples, some of them were designated as asylum centers, and you could flee there if you felt you were unlawfully charged with a capital offense. A famous example of violation of that was when Cleopatra's younger sister fled. She was living in Ephesus, fled to the temple, and Mark Antony, Cleopatra's lover, sent Hitler to drag her out of the Artemis temple and to kill her. So
Wow.
you have these kind of things going on in the historical background. But
It is.
very definitely, there was a major uh, holiday, the Artemisia, that happened every spring, that would literally draw tens of thousands of visitors to Ephesus for this. You know, in the same way Jews would go to Ephesus, to Jerusalem for the feast, they would come to Ephesus for these big Artemis festivals too. And I think that's the context where you see in Acts 19 with the riot taking place, is during one of these festivals when the pocketbooks of the silversmiths being negatively impacted by Paul's preaching.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that Artemis, being a fertility goddess, when I lead trips to the Oriental Institute Museum, we begin in the Mesopotamian gallery, and the very first things that we see in the archaeological record are fertility goddess figurines. I mean, this just goes back to the beginning of human history. People wanting to hedge their bets and make sure that, you know, everything was fertile. They had a lot of kids and they had food, and food was on the table. So it's interesting that there's a continuity even in the period of the Roman world. The Greco-Roman world of fertility was an important thing, and also locally in Turkey as well.
Yeah. And then at a later period, this particular Artemis temple, they never did finish it. So, you know, there was misadministration of funding issues even in antiquity. And they transformed it, and part of it became an imperial cult temple and the rest for Artemis. So,
Wow.
but it's really interesting.
You said the Americans are excavating there currently, right?
Yeah, currently. And this is one of their, this is an American reconstruction. Now, this has been criticized at it being called Disneyland archaeology. Okay. And so they took this gymnasium complex and took the elements they found and then reconstructed it. So you can tell what's original and what has been replaced with. But you know, the positive side of this is that you see the scale of these ancient buildings. Most of the time you go to these sites and everything's broken down. You don't get the scale, but you know, I think that's the positive side of their reconstruction here at Sardis.
Absolutely. And do you know which what particular area they're excavating in, and what you know, what they're, I don't know if you follow that, or if that's something you have.
I follow it very much. So they've been excavating up on the north side of the Acropolis. They've actually found an imperial cult temple.
Oh, cool.
Up there and near the theater. And they've actually, and then under the theater, they found, going back to some Lydian houses clear back from the 8th, 7th centuries. So this site has an incredible history from all the periods, whether it's Lydian, Persian, Seleucid, you know, Roman, and Byzantine, and onwards. So
wow,
you know, centuries of history.
Yes, that's
and
so
then
amazing.
What this Sardis is most noted for is the largest synagogue that's been discovered outside of Israel.
Wow.
And so this is just to the south of this gymnasium we saw. It adjoins it, and it's estimated they could have about 1,000 people standing in this particular synagogue that's east facing.
Wow.
So it really is spectacular.
And it looks like a mosaic floor as well.
It's got a mosaic floor. Just behind the photo, there's an atrium with dedicatory inscriptions of it. One of them mentions a God-fearer that gave money for the mosaic floor for this. So there was a very large Jewish community here in Sardis. So even though it's not mentioned in the letter to Sardis, we have Jews mentioned both in Smyrna and in Philadelphia. All of these cities had a core Jewish community for hundreds of years before Revelation is written.
What is the synagogue date to, Mark?
This particular structure, we're looking at the third phase when it becomes a synagogue.
Okay.
First phase, we have a phase in the first century AD, then repurposing in second century, and probably it's in the later third century that the Jews acquire this property, which is location, 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 right in
Yep.
downtown Sardis. So
Yep.
it just shows their influence here in the city to be able to acquire such prime real estate.
So fascinating. And that's a great insight into, and we see this not just here in Turkey, but also in Israel, in the site where our team at ABR is currently excavating at Shiloh. There's a synagogue there as well, and you can see the different occupational layers. And it's not, I think people have a tendency to think that archaeology is really straightforward, and it's just this perfectly level lines in which, and they're a tangled, jumbled mess, and you have to, it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle in which you've got different puzzle pieces all jumbled together, and you have to sort them and organize them. And but when you have a big floor like this, it really, really helps.
Yeah. Let me mention too, and as you well know, publication is an important part of archaeology. Some excavation teams are better than others in getting timely reports out. And one of the issues in Sardis has been a final excavation report. Decades ago, the initial excavation began. And so the Sardis expedition is looking for the final report on the synagogue to come out probably in 2021. So, but they are very good. Now, if you go on their website, you can download for free now PDFs of all the volumes that they've published related to the excavations at Sardis. So,
oh, wow. And what's that website?
yeah, just look up Sardis Expedition.
Okay.
It's under Harvard or Cornell is their website,
Okay.
under publications. So they have done a great service to students of Scripture by being able to go in and have free access to all these publications. Used to sell in hardcover for $50 to $100 each.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. I know that the Oriental Institute here in Chicago also publishes a lot of stuff for free. So really a lot of great resources. The Assyrian Dictionary, I think the Hittite Dictionary that the University of Chicago has been working on for many, many years. So thank the Lord for these great free resources. And if you're a scholar studying the New Testament or Greco-Roman history, there's a lot of great resources for you to study this. So,
Yeah.
as well as your organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll keep going.
Okay.
We get to Philadelphia, not much to see. Again, we've got an issue of urban archaeology of the modern city Al-Shahir. The reason most people stop here, even though there's not much to see, it's right between Sardis and Laodicea. So this is a later, the pillars from a 6th century Byzantine church in the city. There is an acropolis there, but this is another example. So you can see the eastern end of a theater, but it's all been stripped out. All the marble seating, everything is gone. We also have another theater in the city. So this is a stadium now, not a theater. That again, it's been totally robbed out.
Wow.
And so you can go into many of the old mosques in these cities, old houses. You can find the various blocks and parts that come out of these Greco-Roman structures. So that's certainly a challenge in some of these cities.
Yes.
And you can see, yeah, the modern city down below.
What city is that? Is that Sardis still, or?
Yeah, no, we're in Philadelphia now.
Philadelphia. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
The first Philadelphia, not the one in the U.S. The one in the U.S. is named after this one.
Yes, it is. So yeah, this is the Turkish Philadelphia, Al-Shahir. So
City of brotherly love.
It certainly is, with quite an interesting history, which I tell in my book, Biblical Turkey. So we're finally at our seventh of the 7 churches at Laodicea, and you can see that beautiful mountain in the background. So here very clearly, we've got a street called the Syrian Street that runs east-west. So a Decumanus Maximus here. And at the base of that mountain to the east is the city of Colossae. So you have this cluster of Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis, just a few miles apart from each other, here about 100 miles to the east of Ephesus. And so when I first started going to this site, taking groups here, we had to bring buses in on old dirt roads. Nothing was to be seen here. And the local university, Monocle University, with an archaeology department, started the excavations in the 2000s. And now Laodicea was one of the premier archaeological sites that we have in Turkey.
Fantastic. What's the name of that mountain back there in the back?
This is called Mount Cadmus, or the modern Turkish name is Honaz Dağ. So Honaz comes from Honai and Colossae, so there's kind of a continuity in the names here. Now, one of the issues that you probably talked about with your podcast is stratigraphy. So
Yes.
in Israel, you've got a lot of stratigraphy, but here in Turkey, you can see this stuff is basically a foot or two underground. So all
Yep.
they have to do is kind of clear it off, and suddenly you've got the Roman street right there. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now, Mark, I had read it. I mean, you may get to this in a moment, but you know, when you read the account in Revelation of where Christ is speaking, he's got a message to all the seven churches, and he talks about the lukewarmness because you're lukewarm. Could you maybe speak to that? Were you going to talk about that and maybe some historical, maybe what that might mean? And was there water coming into the city, and is there anything to any truth to that?
Yeah, I'm still kind of working on that one because that's my paper for next year at the NEAS Archaeology Conference. Yeah, and some of the early writers on this got it wrong. I mean, some have suggested that we'll see a picture of the theater. Well, let me go ahead to that.
Yeah.
Here. So you see the white to the north there in the distance over the top of the theater?
Yes.
So that's the hot springs of Hierapolis. So the Hierapolis is right above there. And so there's still thermal springs up there. We stay in those when we're traveling. So it's a nice evening to relax in the hot water. But you can see Hierapolis just to the north. And some people suggested, well, they brought the thermal water to Laodicea. Well, of course not. They didn't do that. There's no evidence of that. In fact, there was a lake between the two cities in the first century. So that theory kind of gets shot down. Others have suggested that the rivers on each side of Laodicea, that the water was not good, that it was lukewarm, but they never drank that water because we have discovered now in their excavations a wonderful water system that came from a deep aquifer that now the modern city of Denizli, which is just south, uses the same water supply that ancient Laodicea used as well. You can still see the pipes, the siphon system that they use bring water into the city. So, you know, some of the older theories now, because of, again, archaeological excavation, have been discredited. One of the theories that I've advanced is Laodicea is surrounded by mountains. You can see the white there, and for much of the year, you've got the snow on the top, the cold, you know, with the melt runoff supplying there, and then to the north, got the white there with the hot. So Laodicea geographically sits right between the hot and the cold.
And the cold.
And so maybe Jesus using its location metaphorically, you know, between these two. So one possible interpretation.
That's fascinating. It makes sense. It's in
Yeah.
between the hot and the cold. It's neither
Yeah.
hot nor cold. So
Yeah.
that's a really good insight, and what a great analogy, and also just explanation of how archaeology sort of helps us to answer some of these questions, or potentially answer them, because we're always discovering new things.
Yeah, let me go back to a couple other things. So we've got the street. So this is one of the most interesting things that was found a couple of years ago by the archaeologists. So they were clearing out a nymphaion. So all of these cities had these beautiful waterworks, so big, huge fountains. And so this piece of column had been dumped in there. Now, one of our struggles as we think about early Judaism, we read in the book of Acts about the synagogues, the God-fearers, we can't find evidence. No synagogues have ever been found in Ephesus. We don't have one in Pisidian Antioch where it's mentioned, but we have various Jewish symbols and things like this that have been found. And so this has really intrigued archaeologists and Jewish and Christian historians, because you can see what? A menorah below with a cross carved over the top of it. And so if you look at the menorah, and this is the most common symbol of Jewish communities we have in Turkey today, you see the shofar To the right of that, and then to the left, it's a little hard to see here, we have the lulav, or the palm branch.
Hmm.
And then just below the crack, and again, it's hard, you can see the base of the stand there that the menorah is sitting on is the base of what's called the etrog, or the citron fruit. So these three elements are typically found with menorahs that are found in Turkey and also in Israel, too, as well. And then at some time, and then you get little flames coming off the top of the menorah as well. At some later times, somebody carved this cross, and this round circle called the globus, very typical in Byzantine architecture, is put right over the middle of it. And so when I bring groups in Laodicea up to this, I ask them, well, how would you interpret this? Is this a positive, a negative interpretation to this? So it's interesting to see how people looking at this have various interpretations. Some suggest, well, maybe this is a Jewish person who became a Christian and they combined the symbols. Others suggest, well, maybe this is an idea of what we call Christian supersessionism. They've superseded, or now have triumphed over Judaism in doing this. Or maybe it shows the reconciliation, Jews and Christians working together in the city of Laodicea. So I ask you, Ted, how would you interpret it?
That's a great question. Wow. I mean, yeah. Do we have any other precedent anywhere else? Is there any other? I mean, we can look through the Byzantine Empire. There's a lot of engravings. It does seem to.
Unique.
It is unique.
Never one of these found anywhere else.
Well, I just go back to the Apostle Paul, and especially in Romans, because he's addressing the Christians in Rome, and he's addressing Jews and Christians, and talking to them both about how it's only by faith that we're saved. So I do know that a lot of Paul's letters, he addresses both, and he really goes to great lengths to explain how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Yeah. So it sort of to me seems like it's in keeping with the fulfillment of Jesus being the fulfillment of the Jewish Messiah.
Yeah.
The light of the world.
Yeah. I'll tip my hand. I think it's a negative symbol.
Okay.
I actually think this column probably stood at the entrance to the synagogue, marking an entrance, because one of the privileges I had a number of years ago was working at the excavations of the synagogue in Priene, which is just north of Miletus. And we have a very similar thing on one of the doorposts where there's a menorah. And they're not graffiti. Even though it looks a bit crude, it is designed art to mark sacred space and going in there. And I think that if the person was trying to show the two together, he would have lifted the cross with the globus above the top of the menorah. But by putting the globus, this round circle, right in the middle of it, it's more for destruction.
Yes.
So that's my interpretation. So whether that's correct, nobody knows. But there's been a number of articles already written about this, and it's quite famous.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this column was right at the entrance to the synagogue. Is that right?
I think that's where it stood. So I think that we have this from a synagogue in Laodicea. Where it was, we don't know. It's been, of course, later recycled. And as I said, archaeologists found it dumped inside the nymphaeum, and when they were cleaning it out, they found it.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Hey, now one more thing to show you. I know we're taking a bit of time.
No, that's fine.
So one of the things that we have, Laodicea is a huge archaeological site. I mean, it's literally going to take them decades to do this. And it sits on kind of a mound right in the middle of the river valley there. And as I pointed out, Hierapolis is in the background there to the north. The Italians are working there. They have a wonderful archaeological excavation that's been going on there for a number of decades. And one of the most important archaeological finds that they discovered a couple of years ago was the tomb of Philip, the apostle.
Oh,
I think it's Philip the apostle, not the evangelist, and the church that was built around it. And so I've recently done a presentation on that that's featured on my website. You can go and take a look at that with the PowerPoint there. And I've written an article, hopefully that will be published soon, related to all that as well. So that's Hierapolis to the north. And here we're back in Laodicea, we're looking at the West Theater. So it has two theaters, a West Theater and a North Theater. And so this is the state that it used to be in. Now, look what's going on now. So
Wow.
the archaeologists are doing a full-scale cleaning. They did restoration and reconstruction. So you can see the stage building now. They're going to repurpose the seats. And so you're going to Laodicea now. This is largely closed off. They have huge cranes sitting there working. And so perhaps when I'm there the next time, we'll see progress. But probably in the next year or two, this will be totally restored. So
that's so awesome.
this
Mark,
is
you can get down there on the stage, Mark, and give your lectures.
Yeah, you can do that.
To your tour groups.
Yeah, the same thing's happening in Ephesus. You can barely go in the theater now. They're doing another restoration there as well. So the best theater that we have preserved is in Hierapolis. It's really an excellent one there. So, yeah, it's quite a project they've undertaken in Laodicea.
Wow, what a beautiful, amazing structure.
Yeah. Well, I'm out of slides, Ted, so you're free to ask questions and whatnot.
That is,
give you some visuals of what's happening at the seven churches, especially archaeologically.
Thank you so much, Mark. So much to process and think about. Just this great sort of 30,000-foot view of the archaeology of the seven churches of Revelation. Mark, you've been there and you live there, been doing it for years. Is there anything that really, in your mind, personally stands out that when you give tours, really brings everything home to you when you read the New Testament, when you read the book of Acts, or you read Revelation? And it really just all comes together and you can really see it visually. And I don't know, just has a big impact on you personally.
Yeah, I think just traveling the roads and routes that connected these churches, that going to Israel really changes your perspective on that land. You realize how small it is. I mean, still I go back to Israel, you're driving 5 minutes and you're going from these places that you envisioned in the Bible must have been, long distance apart or something, from Capernaum to Magdala or something, but distances are huge in Turkey. So we follow the footsteps of Paul and as we leave Tarsus and go up to Derbe and Lystra and Iconium, at the end of the day, people are just exhausted, and I remind them, you've been doing this on an air-conditioned bus. Paul did this on foot, taking many, many days, And so you really get a sense of Paul's commitment, to preach the gospel, and then after churches are founded, to pastor them by writing letters and revisiting them. And to do this in the midst of so much strife, persecution, and opposition. And I think that's one of the real values that you have on being on the ground.
Yes.
And going from site to site. I mean, some places will be disappointing. There's not much to see at Derbe. There's not much to see at Lystra. They're basically tells, or in Turkish they'll call it huyuk. But just being there, and seeing where New Testament history was made, and I know everybody who does it, they just go home and they just see, my reading of the text has changed, by traveling these routes. And similarly, just do a visit to the seven churches too. That these are real places. They had real believers, real churches, and what they struggled with very similar to our struggles, even though we're living 20 centuries later.
Absolutely. Years ago, I came across this book, and you may know this scholar. I'm not sure. It's the name of the scholar is Wayne Meeks. He wrote a book called "The First Urban Christians: The Social World of the Apostle Paul." And one of the things that Meeks says in the book is that he talks about the interconnectedness of the Roman Empire in the early church, and the fact that there were literally thousands of miles of paved Roman roads. And isn't it interesting? Of course, there's no accidents in God's eternal scheme of things, that the early church and the Apostle Paul and these churches in Asia Minor and all throughout Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean, and then also down in the Levant, are connected by Roman roads, and then the sea routes as well. And that is how Christianity spread. and you can actually go and follow. You can stand on these roads and see where the Apostle Paul went. And it's sort of like the ancient internet, except it was a real highway. It really was a real big major influence in the world.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming on Monocle and Spade and sharing your vast knowledge of the area. And again, if people want to get in touch with you, they can check out your website. Do you want to kind of give us what's the best way that people can check out your work?
Yeah, I have a page on academia.com where I publish all my papers. A lot of them interact with archaeology and ancient history, which really is a focus of mine. I'm very easy accessible. I'm always answering questions. Just Mark Wilson at sevenchurches.org. So dash a question to me as well. And so I work with a tour agency, a travel agency in Turkey called Tutku Tours, TKU. And you can go onto that site and see some of the tours that are being advertised that I lead. So often we'll take leading tours of the seven churches, Paul's journeys, not only in Turkey, but in other sites as well. And so just really invite people who are interested in coming to get in touch and join one of these tours sometime.
And do you have any tours coming up, Mark? Are things getting ramped back up in Turkey as far as the touring goes?
Yeah, we have a seven churches tour happening 2 weeks. I know that's a little bit sudden, but next year we've got a Paul tour scheduled here in Turkey. And so in the coming years, I just regularly rotate with seven churches, journeys of Paul, and expanding my knowledge base always. I've got a tour actually in a year. We're looking at Paul and Illyricum and Titus and Dalmatia, looking at early Christianity in the Adriatic.
Oh, wow.
And one of my book project I'm working on is Peter in Asia Minor, because as you know, in 1 Peter 1:1, the 5 provinces are all located here in Asia Minor, a little bit north of where I'm at. And so I'll be leading a tour looking at Peter's communities. So the thesis of this particular book is Peter himself is the one who evangelized these regions and started those churches himself on his way west. So.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on Monocle and Spade, and we appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get to see you. I'm, Lord willing, hopefully going to be at ETS this year in Dallas,
good.
or in Fort Worth, rather. Are you going to be there, right? Correct?
I'll be there, so look forward to seeing you in
Very
person.
good, very good. Well, God bless you, brothers. Thank you so much for sharing today, and I wish you the best, and hope you get lots of tours coming your way very soon.
Thanks, Ted. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you guys so much for watching Monocle and Spade, the podcast of epic archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. God bless. Take care, guys.